had their in there.
What's the
I like
date?
that idea.
Textbook page one ninety-seven.
Huh?
No notes today, this is your notes, everything it needs, right there on page 197, it's a chart.
Very day.
So from this, we're gonna learn about the commercial banking industry, specifically the dual banking system that we use in our country. Commercial banks, think about what that means, that's banks where we citizens deposit our money. Alright, well, we have a dual system. You can see on the left side of the chart, those are national banks. On the right side of the chart are state banks. The difference between a national bank and a state bank is simply which government gave them the permission to open. In other words, who issued their charter. The charter is the written permission that a bank has to obtain in order to open for business. Alright, we're not saying the government runs the banks. No, banks are part of the private sector. Alright, they are private businesses run for profit, just like Walmart, McDonald's, and Disney World. Alright, banks are part of the private sector. But because they deal and handle other people's money, they are heavily regulated by the government. Alright, so the government makes sure banks don't rip us off, basically. So banks you can't open a bank by just hanging up a sign. Alright, you have to get a charter in order to accept deposits from other people. So the banks on the left side of our chart on page 197 are banks that were chartered by the national government. And on the right side is state banks, chartered by state governments. So how many national banks are there?
A lot. One.
National,
One.
one,
Good one.
national.
Are you on page 197 in your
Oh,
textbook?
4,800.
4,800 national banks. Now, we don't mean branches, right? Bank of America would be one of those. Right, not
197.
all the different branches. Sometimes you can tell by the name of a bank, whether it's a national bank or a state bank. Like Bank of America, obviously a nationally chartered bank, right? First Federal, that's a national bank. Such and such a national bank. Or if it says such and such a state bank, duh, then we know it's a state chartered bank. Or Florida Sun Trust, obviously that would be a state bank. So sometimes you can tell by the name, not always. So what's the big difference? Well, go down to where it says under national banks, where it talks about the Federal Reserve System. Next week, we're gonna outline the Federal Reserve System. That's not a commercial bank, that's the central bank of the United States, but that's another chapter. Alright, we'll deal with that later, but for now, what I want you to see on your chart is what does it say about national banks when it comes to the Federal Reserve?
They must be a member of.
They are required to be members of the Federal Reserve. National banks must be Federal Reserve members. Right? Check state banks. What does it say about state banks and Federal Reserve membership?
Not members of, covered by the United States.
Some are Federal Reserve members, but not all. In fact, most are not Federal Reserve members. How many are Federal Reserve members? Read the chart. How many state banks are there total?
Oh, 1,200. Well,
How
there's
many?
9,000.
9,000. 9,000. So how many are Federal Reserve members?
1,200.
1,200. So most of them are not Federal Reserve members. That's all you need to know for now. There's advantages and disadvantages to being Federal Reserve members. National banks have no choice. When they get their national charter, they are Federal Reserve members. State banks get to decide. Most of them decide not to. 1,200 decided to do that. Next thing I want you to notice is the FDIC. Alright, before we look at the chart, let's figure out what that means. FDIC. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Corporation.
Alright, so think about what that means. Your deposits are insured by the federal government, so you can't lose your money. No matter what happens to the bank, you can't lose your money. The federal government is insuring it. And the reason we did this is, you might remember from your study of history, the 1930s was the Great Depression. And one of the things that happened in the Great Depression is a lot of banks failed.
Didn't they shave
Means
zeros
they-
off?
They closed down forever. And what if you had your life savings in the bank, and you go to the bank and it says closed, and they don't mean for today, they mean it's closed, period, and your life savings is in there,
I'd see.
your life savings gone. Now imagine that would happen. That stinks, doesn't it? Well, that happened to many Americans during the Great Depression. So after that happened, do you think people were trusting to put their money in the bank for safekeeping?
No,
No.
you do it at home.
I think I'd put my money under the mattress, it's safer there. Right? Well, we know from our study earlier in the year when we did the circular flow model and we learned about the financial market or the banks, that you need a well-developed financial market. That's the heart of the economy, remember that? The banks pump the money where it needs to go, just like the heart pumps the blood where it needs to go. And where does the money need to go? It needs to go to the business firms as financial capital, which the businesses will then use that financial capital to purchase real capital, which are the tools of production, and that's how businesses grow and expand, and that's how goods and services are produced, and that's how jobs are created. We need to have people put their money in banks, or none of that's gonna happen. So after that happened in the Depression, people were, for good reason, very distrustful of banks. So we passed this new law, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and that says that if you have money in the bank and the bank fails or closes for whatever reason, you will get your money. The federal government will pay you your money. So after this is passed, where is your money safer? In the mattress
The
under your
bank.
bed or in the bank?
The bank.
Obviously, it's safer in the bank. So then people started depositing their money again, and then the banks could send the money to the businesses so they could grow and expand. So it was important that we pass that. Now that we know what the FDIC means, let's look back at our chart. What does it say about national banks and FDIC coverage?
Required to be covered.
They're required to be covered by the FDIC. Have to. State banks get to choose whether they want FDIC coverage. Almost all of them do. How many don't?
300.
300.
So then,
It's up to them, but most all of the 9,000 have chosen FDIC
but
coverage.
if they choose not to, wouldn't people not put their money in?
They're usually not banks where you and I would bank. It's just more of a bank for investors maybe. So, I don't know. Any questions on that chart?
But why wouldn't they? Does it like cost money to
I
be
don't know.
covered by the FDIC?
I don't know, can't answer that. All right, flip over to page 198, let's talk a little bit more about the commercial banking industry. All right, we know even driving around town, there's banks on every other corner, sometimes more than one bank on the same corner. Right, well, all of them have charters, right? Most of them have FDIC coverage. Some of them are Federal Reserve members. We already know all that. But just a reminder, banks are not the government. Banks are part of the private sector. They're in business to make profit, just like any other business. And just like any other business, as a consumer, you need to shop around for your bank. You can't say, well, all banks are the same. That's like saying all restaurants are the same. Are all restaurants the same?
No.
Taco Bell or Ruth's Chris Steakhouse are not the same. Alright? They appeal to a different set of customers. Well, banks are the same way. Some banks want lots of small depositors, maybe like you and I. So they have policies to entice us to do our banking there. Like they'll say, free checking, no minimum balance. Right? Other banks don't want lots of depositors, they want a few really big depositors. So they'll have policies that'll discourage us from putting our money there. They'll make you pay for your checks, and they'll make you keep at least $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever in your account, or else they'll fine you. Right? They appeal to a different group of customers. So just like any other business, you need to shop around for a bank. One of the considerations is convenience, right? You want a bank that's on your way home or on your way to work or whatever, but that's not the only consideration. So let's think about what banks do for us. Well, one of the things they do is accept deposits and keep them safe. Speaking of safe, do you see that picture on page 198? That's a safe. Believe me, your money is much safer in the bank than under your mattress. But besides that, we know banks don't just put your money in the safe and keep it safe for you till you come along Friday night and withdraw it. What do they do with your money?
Lend it.
They lend it. So banks extend loans, so they accept deposits, they extend loans, that stuff we've already known. That's nothing new. And then they offer a bunch of other miscellaneous services. So let's talk about some of those miscellaneous services. That a full service bank, many banks advertise themselves as full service banks. So they do things like they'll rent you a safe deposit box. Alright, so you go into the bank and rent a box, different shapes and sizes, and you pay a monthly fee, and you can put in that box, store there safely whatever you want. And no one is allowed to go into your safe deposit box, not even the people who work at the bank are allowed to. That's your personal space. And you can put important papers in there, family heirlooms, the bloody knife from the murder you committed, whatever you want to put in there. It's your space.
They don't look at
And
it
no one
before
can
you put it in.
look in there.
Put a
Now,
box.
with an exception, right? If the government obtains a search warrant, they can search your home, your car, your safe deposit box, and find the evidence or whatever. But they have to have a search warrant. Alright, another miscellaneous service is banks will issue cashier's checks. Alright, all that means is it's a check written from the bank's checkbook. Alright, so let's say that Gage was to sell a used car, he listed on Craigslist, and I call him up, and we agree to meet. I kick the tires, test drive it, I like it. Alright, and he wants $10,000 for this used car. And I said, hey Gage, will you take a check? He might laugh and say, nah, I don't think so. Why won't he take my check?
Because it takes money away and stuff like that.
Because it's not guaranteed money until you go and turn it to the bank and it could be fake or
Yeah,
whatever.
that check might what we call bounce. In other words, I might not have $10,000 in the bank, and I write him a check, $10,000, and I drive off with the car, he goes to deposit the check and it bounces. He has nothing, I'm tooling around in his car, so he ain't gonna take my personal check. He'll say, no, but I will take a cashier's check, Mr. Kiefer. Alright, so now I can go to the bank and meet up with him later, or we can go to the bank together, whatever, and I'll get a cashier's check, and I will tell the bank, make this out to Gage for $10,000. And this isn't my check, is it? It's the bank's check. So they'll check my account, they'll see I do have $10,000 in it, and then they'll write that cashier's check. I give that to him, that's good as gold, right? That's not gonna bounce. Now he'll hand me the keys, we're both happy. He's got his money.
I prefer cash.
Alright, bank will also use certified checks. Right, a little different than a cashier's check, but similar. So let's say same scenario, I meet up with Gage, we agree, I say, hey, will you take a personal check? And he'll say, well, if you get it certified, I will. Alright, so now I gotta go to my bank, I write my check from my checkbook, not the cashier's check from the bank, but my own check to Gage, $10,000, I sign it, and then I go to the teller and say, can you certify this for me? And they'll check my account, make sure I have enough money in there, and then they'll stamp it, certified. Now it's guaranteed, it can't bounce. So when I hand him that, he knows he's got his money.
If someone makes it fake.
So we have cashier's checks, we have certified checks. Another thing a bank will do is they will issue you traveler's checks. Alright, traveler's checks, that's what it sounds like. If you go on vacation and you're carrying cash and you lose your wallet, vacation's over. Right, you got no more money. But if you lose your wallet and you had traveler's checks, minor inconvenience, but the vacation can continue. Alright, here's how it works. Go to the bank before your trip and you say, I would like some traveler's checks, this money, dollars, and you want this denominations, and they come in like 20s, 50s, 100s, at least 50s and 100s, I'm not sure about 20s. And there's 2 spots for your signature. So you have to sign every single one of them in front of the teller, and they witness your signature. But you only put 1 signature on each traveler's check. And then when you go to spend it, on the cruise ship or at the resort or the restaurant, whatever, now in front of the cashier, you sign the other blank, and they witness it. So your signature has been witnessed at both ends, when you bought it and when you spent it. And those signatures, of course, have to match. The person at the cash register has to make sure those signatures match. So that makes it very difficult for me to steal your wallet. And you got cashier's checks? Yeah, there's 1 signature there, and if enough practice, I might be able to forge your signature, but not while someone's watching me on the spot, right?
Yeah.
So they're much, much safer. You lose your you lose your traveler's checks, you just report them lost or stolen, they issue you some new ones, you're good to go. So we have cashier's checks, certified checks, traveler's checks, safe deposit boxes. Banks will give you financial advice, help you prepare a will. Miscellaneous services, that's why we call them full service banks. Gabby?
So if someone ever wants to pay with like a certified check or the other one, what's it called?
Cashier's check?
Yeah, that. Would it be best to go with them to the bank, because what if they just forge it or like they make a fake one?
Very difficult to do that. Really difficult to fake a certified or
But
cashier's
if the
check. I'm sure it's been done, but
But if the person who's receiving it doesn't know it's fake, because they don't know a lot about it, and then it takes to the bank and they're like, oh, this isn't, like, we didn't certify this.
I guess, where do you, I don't know, I guess that could happen.
I think,
That's why Dylan prefers cash. Probably. He's either been burned by somebody, or he ripped somebody off, who knows, just saying. Any questions on commercial banks? That pretty much ends chapter 10. Monday we'll start in on chapter 11.
you decided to give us